With the pervasive impact of human activities on marine ecosystems, assessing ecological state provides essential information for conservation efforts and sustainable development. Good day, everyone. I am Jude Adrian Alberto, and together with Kriza, Corinne, and Ria, we will be determining the ecological status of benthic coastal communities in Leyte Gulf, Philippines.
Corals, along with algae, seagrass, and benthic organisms, form the benthic community. These biotic components of the benthos vary depending on the nature of the substratum, the water flow, and its depth. Seabed substrates offer a habitat for a wide range of species along the benthic zone. In general, the biotic interrelationships of the benthos and their environment contributes to the overall ecological conditions of the marine waters and provide important ecological services. The high value of benthic communities in terms of their ecological and economic benefits encourages the high level of non-sustainable abuse of resources and exploitation. Combined factors of natural and anthropogenic pressure, such as human pressure on coastal land, sewage disposal, and other disturbances, cause benthic ecosystem destruction and biodiversity loss. To decrease anthropogenic risks to ecosystem function, marine protected areas are established. These are a range of management zones within the marine community that are regulated from human activities more stringently than in the surrounding waters. This study aims to determine the composition and percentage cover of the benthic life communities in Leyte Gulf, to assess the ecological conditions of benthic communities using live coral index, mortality ratio, and bioerosion ratio, to determine and characterize dominant coral forms and algal groups, to determine the relationships between benthic life communities and abiotic substrates, and to provide a viable management plan for the conservation of benthic life communities in Leyte Gulf.
The survey area is located in Leyte Gulf, the central eastern part of the Philippines. The study covered 13 stations within and outside the 7 marine protected areas that are situated in 3 municipalities: Pananabolon in Basay, Kalyanap, Kapuruan, and Madong-Badong in Marabot, Sagang in Tanawan, Hilapad in Tolosa, and Binangalan in Palo as shown in Figure 1. For the data collection, secondary data from BFAR Fish Coral and UPREIS were obtained and utilized for analysis. The collection of primary data was from February to April 2019. Manta-tow surveys and the point intercept transect method were used to monitor and collect data as recommended by the Coral Reef Monitoring Manual. Table 1 depicts the benthic components and life forms found in Leyte Gulf. They are categorized as abiotic, algae, dead corals, hard corals, other fauna, soft corals, and sponges. The benthic components are further classified into their respective life forms. For the data analysis, the composition and percentage cover of benthic community were calculated. Each score was initially tallied from the raw secondary data of the benthic community in Leyte Gulf according to their respective categories and IDs. The percentage of coral reef community cover was calculated using the formula shown. The percentage cover of benthic life forms was used in assessing the reef health indices of the benthic community in Leyte Gulf. The following reef health indices were calculated: live coral cover, mortality ratio, and bioerosion ratio. Furthermore, a linear regression test was carried out to demonstrate the relationship of mortality and bioerosion ratio with benthic life forms. A scatter plot was created to visualize each trend. For the interrelationships, person correlation was used to assess the significant association between and within the various benthic groups and life forms using percent covers. The significance of the R values was determined by comparing them to a T critical value. The ecological condition of the live coral cover was assessed through the 5-point category scale as shown in Table 2. Table 3 shows the quantification guide based on the mortality and bioerosion ratio. Table 4 provides a guide for interpreting the mortality bioerosion index values. It is also used to assess the ecological condition of coral reefs in various MPA sites.
To begin with the results and discussion, the first figure shows that one-third of the majority of the area is composed of abiotic substrates. Benthic living forms are primarily composed of algae, which is about 30%, followed by hard corals, 19.54%, and dead corals of about 15%. Other biota such as soft corals, sponges, and other fauna cover less than 3% of the benthos. The next figure shows that abiotic components primarily covers Basay, Tanawan, and Tolosa with 34.90%, 45.15%, and 48.65% respectively, whereas algae assemblages cover the majority of the area in Marabot and Palo with 35.55% and 45.30% respectively. A coral to algal shift was observed based on the benthic composition and cover of the Leyte Gulf. According to Schmidt 2002, high nutrient conditions cause coral to algal shift. Coral growth and survival may be jeopardized by competition, as well as low oxygen levels and coral diseases caused by microorganisms that feed on nutrients released by algae. The higher the algae composition in Leyte Gulf may also indicate a lack of limiting factors such as grazing herbivores and abiotic factors that contribute to reef health. Furthermore, the observed higher abiotic substrate cover could indicate sedimentation in Leyte Gulf, which reduces the diversity of the benthic community. Previous studies suggest that fine sediment accumulation, such as sand and silt, can result in clogging and interstitial spaces between larger substrate particles, reducing the number of organic compounds and food resources as well as the available habitat for benthic organisms, increasing invertebrate drift and resulting in the absence of refugees.
Results show that all sites except Tanawan obtained a score of 2 in the 5-point category scale based on live coral cover. Tanawan scored 1 on the 5-point scale with a percentage of 9.4, indicating a very poor condition. The overall score of live coral cover in Leyte Gulf was 2, with a mean live coral cover percentage of 18.59. This suggests that the coral reef health in Leyte Gulf is in poor condition. This overall poor condition of live coral cover corresponds to the trends shown in Gomez et al. 1981 and Liquanan et al. 2019 that the reefs continued to decline since the 1970s. High sediment load could result in phytoplankton overgrowth and increased turbidity, preventing light to go through the water column. This restricts photosynthesis to occur in zooxanthellae of hermatypic corals. Dominance of benthic algae could also cause an increase in oxygen demand and deoxygenation, resulting in the occurrence of dead zones.
The table shows the mortality ratio calculated in each site in Leyte Gulf. Tanawan had the highest mortality ratio of 0.62, whereas Basay had the lowest mortality ratio of 0.31. Results show that coral reefs in Marabot, Basay, and Tolosa were in good condition, whereas Tanawan and Palo were in poor condition. Generally, Leyte Gulf had a mean mortality ratio of 0.45 and a score of 3, indicating good coral reef health conditions. Coral mortality in Leyte Gulf is determined by fishing and natural causes such as disturbance and disease. The findings show a varying trend across sites, implying that coral reef resilience may occur. This demonstrates that coral reefs can resist or recover from degradation, resulting in overall coral reef health. However, the mean mortality ratio is relatively lower compared to other sites with good condition, which may indicate that if destructive fishing and other disturbances are not controlled, coral mortality will increase. In addition, the mortality ratio values obtained were correlated with the abiotic and algae percent cover. There is a weak positive correlation between mortality ratio and algal assemblage cover. Furthermore, mortality ratio showed no correlation with abiotic components. The loss of coral cover is generally associated with an increase in algae abundance. According to Smith and his colleagues, Algae can cause coral mortality indirectly by increasing microbial activity at coral algal interfaces through the release of high dissolved organic carbon levels. This causes stress in corals due to hypoxia, resulting in coral mortality, which provides more space for algae to settle and grow.
The bioerosion index is used to measure carbon destruction in coral reefs, which provides a comprehensive perspective of coral reef health. It is the proportion of hard corals to the total of all biota. A higher index indicates less competition and a lower likelihood of a shift from hard coral to non-coral builder. A lower index, on the other hand, indicates more competition and a higher likelihood of phase shift. Findings revealed that Basian Tolosa had the highest bioerosion ratio of 0.54, indicating good condition of coral reefs. Palo had the lowest ratio of 0.22, indicating that it is very poor. In general, a mean bioerosion ratio of 0.38 and a score of 2 was obtained. This indicates that the coral reef health condition in Leyte Gulf is poor, and there is a shift tendency from hard coral to non-hard coral. Bioerosion increases under conditions that induce coral tissue death and growth of bioeroders. Certain species such as bivalves and barnacles invade corals directly through living tissues while most attack dead skeletons. Thus, any natural or anthropogenic disturbances that induce coral tissue death will increase the chances of invasion by borers and grazers.
The Mortality Bioerosion Index, or MBI, is important in assessing coral reef condition and conservation effectiveness in an area. As shown in Table 11, Basay, Tolosa, and Marabot are in good condition, whereas Tanawan and Palo are in poor health condition. In general, the Leyte Gulf had a mean mortality bioerosion index value of 5, indicating that the ecological coral reef status is in good condition.
Next, Table 9 shows the relationship between various coral forms. Using Pearson correlation, it suggests that there is a strong positive correlation between soft corals and encrusting corals with R value of 0.917, together with foliose corals and hard corals with R value of 0.883, and branching corals with soft corals with R value of 0.876. At the same time, encrusting corals and branching corals have a weak positive correlation of R value of 0.614. Generally, there is a positive correlation between these coral life forms, as soft corals are found to be associated with colonies such as encrusting, branching, massive, lobate, and etc. This is because hard corals provide the structure for sessile organisms such as algae, sponges, and non-reef building corals, which includes the soft corals for room and attachment. The next table is a summarized data showing the relationships of the different algal groups. There is a weak positive correlation between Halamida species and algal assemblages with an R value of 0.301. A weak negative correlation is seen between algal assemblages and coralline algae with R value of negative 0.617. The rest showed no linear correlation with each other. Halamida species is a calcified green algae with its unique morphology that serves as a structural component of Cenozoic to recent reefs. This may also serve as a structure for other algal assemblages to attach itself, hence its correlation. The thallus of Halimeda is composed entirely of branches that are matted together to form a plant body that can grow over a meter long in some species. Because no cross walls form in any of the filaments, the plant can be considered as a single massive multinucleated cell. Table 11 shows the relationship between the different abiotic substrates. A strong negative relationship between sand and silt with R value of negative 9.33. At the same time, a weak negative correlation was observed between rubbles, rocks, and silt, while rubbles, rocks, and sand showed a weak positive correlation with each other.
This table shows the relationship between various hard coral forms with other biotas such as algae and other fauna. Hard corals, particularly encrusting corals and foliose corals, as well as soft corals, have a negative correlation with some algae. This could be because of the reduction of coral coverage in benthic ecosystems accompanied by a shift towards an algae-dominated system. In most cases, this phenomenon can be associated with episodes of coral bleaching, outbreaks of coral-eating species, major storms, reduced herbivory, sedimentation, and nutrient enrichment. There's also a significant negative correlation between hard corals and other fauna. This can be attributed to the interactions occurring between them, wherein other faunas compete for space where conditions are appropriate for settlement and growth against hard corals. The spatial competition dynamics between hard corals and other fauna is an essential element in understanding the conditions of the benthic ecosystem. Table 13 shows the relationship of various coral forms with dead corals in abiotic substrates. An increase in coral mortality in coral disturbances leads to an increase in the total dead coral cover. Dead corals are living habitats that house a diverse array of bacteria, invertebrates, and plants. These are also rapidly colonized by algal assemblages, inhibiting the recruitment of corals. In relation to coral algae phase shifts, increase in the total dead coral cover lead to the persistence of algae-dominated reef communities rather than corals. Thus, as shown in the table, the presence of hard corals and soft corals was negatively related to the abundance of dead corals. The morphological characteristics of substrate are also important in the survival of numerous benthic organisms. The availability of suitable substrate is one of the factors limiting corals' recruitment process, settlement, and growth. A stabilized hard-bottom substrate gives rise to a higher abundance of corals. On the other hand, soft sediment substrates in the form of sand and silt offers a relatively unstable settlement ground for coral species. This explains the negative correlation between hard corals to sand. Greater coral-algal interactions responsible for phase shifts may occur when the abiotic substrate is limited, hence the negative correlation of hard corals to rocks. Table 14 shows the relationship of algae with dead corals in abiotic substrates. Algae assemblages, like corals, rely on a suitable substrate for their settlement and growth. This species prefer a hard substrate to settle where enough light penetrates. Biotic and abiotic settlement surfaces with microbial biofilms are important keys for algal settlement. This explains the negative correlation of the total algae cover with the abiotic substrate, as well as the positive correlation between macroalgae and rocks. The significant positive correlation between algae and dead corals is because of the proliferation and colonization of algal communities as corals die off following episodes of coral bleaching and mortality. The interactions between corals and algae are important drivers of ecosystem dynamics within the benthic community. Algal community dynamics can affect the structural complexity of coral reefs, wherein the presence of algae could inhibit the settlement and growth of coral taxa. This implies the need to monitor the factors that lead to the abundance of these algal species in order to control the proliferation of certain taxa.
The following conclusions can be inferred based on the findings in the benthic community of Leyte Gulf. Abiotic substrates dominated the benthic ecosystem. Benthic living forms are primarily composed of algae, followed by hard corals and dead corals. Other biota include soft corals, sponges, and other fauna. Based on their live coral cover and bioerosion ratio, the overall condition of coral reefs in Leyte Gulf was poor. The bioerosion ratio also indicated a possible shift from hard coral to non-hard coral. However, based on their coral mortality index, the overall condition of coral reefs was good. There was a weak positive correlation between coral mortality index and algal assemblage cover, whereas coral mortality index and abiotic components did not show any correlation. There was a significant positive relationship between the bioerosion ratio and hard corals, whereas the bioerosion ratio and algal cover had a significant negative relationship. The bioerosion ratio had no significant relationship with the percent cover of soft coral, sponges, or other fauna. In general, there was a positive correlation between the coral life forms. Halimeda sp. and algal assemblage showed a weak positive correlation, while a weak negative correlation was seen between algal assemblages and coralline algae. Hard corals had a negative correlation with algae, other fauna, dead corals, and abiotic substrates. However, a significant positive correlation was observed between hard coral forms and silt. Soft corals were negatively correlated with dead corals. Algae was observed to have a significant positive correlation with dead corals, however, negatively correlated with the total abiotic substrate cover.
Based on the findings, the following are recommended. First, expand current analysis of MPA impacts on benthic organisms and investigate ongoing ecological processes inside and outside MPA boundaries. Second, examine additional parameters such as water quality, substrate composition and stability, wave action impacts, and species tolerance. Third, assess factors hypothesized to impede coral recolonization, survival, and growth to demonstrate the environmental conditions in Leyte Gulf. Fourth, examine the morphology and structural complexity of corals and algae, coral recruitment, and metrics other than the benthic cover to assess reef conditions. In addition, investigate long-term spatio-temporal changes in macroalgal cover and benthic hard coral cover in Leyte Gulf to better understand benthic reef degradation patterns. Consistent reef monitoring and trend analysis should be done to investigate long-term patterns in the benthic community as well as the effects of coral protection on coral loss and formulate an appropriate and effective management strategy to ensure the long-term viability of the benthic population in Leyte Gulf. These recommendations should yield promising results to strengthen local coral reef conservation efforts in the face of long-term degradation and threats to marine biodiversity in Leyte Gulf.
Coral reefs are one of the most sensitive marine ecosystems to local and global impacts. Climate change and a slew of localized threats are wreaking havoc, and future prospects for reef health and functions are bleak. However, managing optimal reef health is crucial, not just because of the incredible variety of these systems, but also because the ecosystem products and services they produce are critical to coastal economies and livelihoods. The kind of management and conservation mechanisms in place must consider both changing environmental and human consequences, as well as possibly changing benefits. As a result, here are some of the potential managerial techniques that are advised for consideration in the management and restoration of benthic communities in Leyte Gulf, categorized into research and monitoring programs, resilience-based management approach, and community-based management approach. For research and monitoring programs, first is to gather biological baseline data instrumental in assessing the conditions of the benthic communities and in determining the possible causes and impacts of many coral reef stressors. This includes faunal biodiversity, ecological processes within the habitat, its ecological state, and the presence of invasive species. The collection of shots should be at multiple spatial and temporal scales to permit more accurate biophysical measurement results. Then, to gather social baseline data that will inform about the anthropogenic activities carried out within the benthic ecosystems that poses threats to the marine biota for the establishment of adaptive MPA management. Then, to conduct regular monitoring and assessments that will track coral reef health and reveal significant trends regarding the interactions of the biotic and abiotic components within these ecosystems and how these interactions shape the biophysical structure of the reef. Lastly, is to involve all agencies and entities in the design, conduct, and interpretation of research and monitoring to strengthen awareness and target critical knowledge gaps through cooperative coral reef management. For the resilience-based management approach, first is to maintain ongoing communication with federal, state, territorial, and international government management partners about the resilience-based management approach and its benefits, as well as provide the appropriate training and capacity on resilience-based management principles and tools. Then, to contribute to the assessment of coral reef ecosystem vulnerabilities to the effects of climate change and use the results to guide and support management measures. Lastly, is to encourage the collection, sharing, and integration of different types of monitoring and modeling to provide a dynamic image of the system that can be used to guide choices and enable adaptive management. One essential component of community-based management approach is the construction of community capacity building, and this includes education and empowerment. This is doable with substantial public awareness campaigns and institutional support. Then to encourage the mobilization of powerful local organizations such as forest farmer groups, as well as the formation of bottom-up inter-village networks. Last, for the community-based management approach, is to improve livelihoods in environmental services. This is to ensure that environmental conservation, agricultural, and community enterprises are integrated. Then connect highland environmental services to lowland and urban regions as it creates reinvestment opportunities. Listed here are all the publications used in the interpretation of the results in determining the ecological status of benthic coastal communities in Leyte Gulf.